Hey guys, here is the Jeep Grand Cherokee 2008 3-liter diesel engine, and it has a poor starting problem. Let me show you what's that. You can crank as much as you want, and it takes a really long time before the car actually starts. And yeah, it keeps going and nothing happens. You can push the accelerator pedal on, nothing. It keeps going like that, and it will eventually start, but that will take a good couple of minutes before it actually does. So let me show you how you can trace the problem and how you can fix it. And to start sourcing the problem is what I did is down here outside where the fuel tank is underneath there. When you start the ignition and you sort of crawl down there, you can hear that the pump is buzzing. This is a good indication that the pump is working. If it buzzes, so hopefully it pumps something. You can check that by coming over here in the middle of the engine, of the V-type engine. Right in the middle over here is the fuel filter, and there's a center screw, like a air bleed screw. When you are running the fuel pump in the fuel tank, the ignition zone, it runs for quite some time. You can a little bit open that center deaerating knob, but be careful, you put some rags around, because if it pumps very well and you open it up a bit too much, it's going to spray a lot of diesel around. So you can check that actually the fuel is coming up here, up to the filter. If it does, that's a good sign. That means that the fuel pump in the fuel tank is running and it delivers the pressure up here. And the next thing is, if the filter is okay, then it should surely pass the fuel over to a high pressure pump. In case if it wouldn't pass the fuel through the filter, there's like an indicator, a differential pressure indicator. If it's really clogged, it's gonna tell you, well, go on and replace the filter. But if you don't have any signals on your dash, that's quite okay. I believe the filter is fine. So the next thing is, if the fuel is coming up to the fuel pump, this one's not so easy to check just by looking at it. But if your car was running previously okay, I would assume that it's fine. So the next thing is, it pumps the fuel pump, high pressure fuel pump, pumps over to the fuel rack. This one has a common rail, so each side has its common rail, or its common rail is connected with this small hose, small piping over to the other side. So one fuel pump supplies both sides with fuel, and the fuel common rail fuel system is equipped with, it's hiding over there, right over there on this end of the fuel common rail is the fuel pressure sensor. That fuel pressure sensor checks how big the pressure is, and it should maintain the pressure constant all the time and give the signal to the computer, and computer decides to bleed it off or raise the pressure. And that is done by this fuel pressure regulating valve. If that one's leaking, the fuel will be bled back to the fuel tank. Or the other thing it can be is that the fuel pressure sensor can tell computer, I have plenty of pressure, bleed the pressure off. But this is the other thing, how you can check that. And there is one more link, is the fuel injectors or fuel nozzles by themselves. They can be leaking internally, and if they do leak internally a lot, the pressure can't build up, even though that the fuel pressure regulator is okay and it's fully shut, and there is still so bad leakages, and that the fuel is still draining off that bad back to the fuel tank, and it's not enough pressure to fire up the engine. This you can check by removing these drain lines on each of the fuel injectors. You take these drain lines off on both sides, and while you crank the engine, you can check that the nothing major comes out of these small drain holes. Small squirting is okay, but if it's like shoots big loads, this means it's has too big internal leaks and you can't build up the pressure. But before you do so, you cover everything with rags, because it's going to be pretty messy and the diesel smell is never nice afterwards. And so when we return back to this fuel pressure regulator, here's how you can check it. Another way how you can check and determine that this pressure regulator is faulty is to make sure the signal actually is reaching the pressure regulator, is that the computer works fine and its internal leaks here. As you remove the clip and you have a meter and you put on constant voltage on AC, and you measure across these two terminals. So I had the ignition on. Yeah, it shows 11 volts, which means that the pressure regulator is receiving a signal to close it, but it doesn't because it has an internal leak. So we'll take the pressure regulator off and exchange it for a new one. And when you disconnected the pressure regulator and you started the ignition, you'll have an error message which you will need to clear later on. I will show you how to do that. We'll have to remove fuel injector pipes as well, because we'll need to slightly lift up the common rail fuel rack just a little bit, otherwise there is no space over here to remove it. So what I normally do, I do slack it a bit. So once it's slack, you will after you lift it off, you can remove it by hand, put it back in, secure it, and then we'll tighten it. That's the easiest way. Otherwise, when you remove it later on, you can't easily take that off. So let's take I slacked it, removed the leakage tube so you can access these high pressure fuel pipes. One is 17, the other one's 18. So we're nearly halfway there. Also need to release this holding down the fuel pipe, holding down bolt. Use that one. So the main fuel line is released, and also there is one here on the other line or other side which goes to the other fuel rack. We also need to slack this one. That one's also slack. And now let's undo the common rail. And this is how it looks. That's a small filter, and inside here is either a needle valve or a pin with the ball which is closing down the fuel drainage through the filter over to this passage, so it sort of goes and drains back into the fuel tank. Sometimes it does. I could see a little rust here, huh? So I wonder inside it might be rusty as well, and the ball doesn't seal properly, and this is why I have an internal leaks. So there's another thing to look into. Is you look inside that opening there where the pressure control valve sits. It uses this flat surface against that surface inside there, and if that one's corroded, we'll have a look into that. If that one's corroded, even though you put in a new valve, it can still leak through the sides and also not keep the pressure. So our aim is that it sits here properly and it only releases when the solenoid tells it to do so. It's hard for you to see, but I was looking inside and it looked in really good condition. The surface is smooth all the way around. It is like a little bit different color, but it's fine. It's haven't been no scores diagonal where you can lose the pressure. So we'll clean up with the clean cloth and we'll be putting the new one in. And by the way, if you want to know which number you have, because there are a few different ones. So this one's the Mercedes, by the way. That's the Mercedes engine on the Jeep. And right here is the 02810029494. That's the Bosch number. So you want to have the exact same thing when you put it back. The new one. Don't look for that Mercedes, never mind. Look for the Bosch thing. And here is the new one. Don't try to touch it with the dirty fingers or so. Take it out of the box and just plug it in. Okay, just hand tight it. Install and put everything back. And then we'll tighten pressure control valve. If you don't know how hard you tighten these fuel pipes, well, I do that by hand. I have sort of that feeling when you need to stop, but you better don't go crazy when it bottoms out. That's too hard. You just tighten it and feel it and let the engine run later on. If you check for leaks, if there is any, you better tighten a little bit, but do not over tighten it. That's not a good thing. And to tighten it down, you hold it against one nut and then you tighten it with the other one. You don't let it slide around. And let's test it. And the engine's running. It took me a little bit longer to start it because the fuel system was empty and it took quite a few starts before it actually started. And you can see you have a check engine light. This is because we removed the connector on the pressure regulator and we started the ignition. The system said something's wrong, didn't have the feedback, and this is why you have this alarm. So let me show you how do I reset it. I have a very cheap scan tool you can buy on any of the selling platforms, a Bluetooth one, the cheapest one you can get. And on my cell phone I have this application, OBD Torque Lite. Starting. Fault codes, show logged faults. These are the fault codes you are going to have as well. And then we do the same fault codes and clear logged faults. Yes, we are sure. And when you will restart the car, there will be no fault codes. So enjoy the ride, guys.